I'm somebody that went to school for criminal justice. When you go to school for criminal justice, when you're educated in the field of criminal justice, you're educated in various forms of psychiatry, well, not psychiatry, psychology, business ethics, crisis intervention, triage, assessment of mental health, that sort of thing. That's what you get when you go to school to learn how to enforce the law. You're taught crisis intervention. You're taught crisis triage assessment of psychiatric conditions. You're also taught, of course, how to respond to people that are psychologically disturbed, mentally disturbed individuals. You're taught this in class. What I found interesting is the police. Dealing with the police has been far easier dealing with the police regarding the harassment I've received online and the police understanding what I'm saying and responding to it in a calm way as opposed to Lenape Valley Foundation. The crisis intervention team that is training these law enforcement officers is the same crisis intervention team that attempted to have me 302'd because they claimed I was having psychotic delusions of persecutory delusions when the place that they sent me to, the attending psychiatrist, quickly Googled me. So the attending psychiatrist quickly Googled me and determined, no, I'm not psychotic, I'm not delusional, I'm being harassed, I'm being threatened, I'm being stalked. And, of course, I'm stating, I've contacted the police know this, but yet Lenape Valley Crisis took none of this into consideration. Then, 6 months later, they attempted to side with the harassers, the people harassing me, claiming that the people harassing me were correct. Then, 6 months after that, they're saying, oh, no, we're not siding with the people harassing you. We don't think you're crazy anymore, and we never did. None of that ever happened. We always believed you. So the point is, what I'm saying is, the people training these police on how to respond to mentally disturbed individuals, I would almost guarantee are less equipped to handle psychologically disturbed individuals than these police are. I would almost hands down guarantee that as somebody that went to school in order to, ideally I went to school to become a police officer or honestly a park ranger is what I wanted to do. I even went for an extension course in wildlife and forestry management. But my point is, Lenape Valley Foundation has far less ability to understand the mentally disturbed than the local police do, and I know that from personal experience. This is truly disturbing too, because what this is what you have to understand about mental health. Mental health is an industry of control, an industry of oppression, an industry of subjugation, and an industry where their patients never need to get any better. It's a paycheck. It's a continuous paycheck created from the exploitation of the public. Now, by them basically commandeering the police force as a means to abduct and victimize people, which is what they're doing. They're trying to make everything a mental illness and to utilize the police to abduct and victimize these people through crisis intervention training is what's going on.
On Friday, January 11th, the 20th graduating class of the Bucks County Crisis Intervention Team simulated real-life interactions with mental health clients. These simulations are a crucial part of law enforcement training for officers responding to calls where mental health concerns may be present.
Now, mind you, these are simulated interactions. These police deal with this stuff every day and have, if they've gone to school for criminal justice or went to a police academy, have already been trained in this. That's what's so freaking ridiculous. And for these people, Lenape Valley, to presume that they are equipped to tell a law enforcement officer how to respond properly to a psychologically disturbed individual in the field of law enforcement is horrifying.
County 911 dispatch officers now have regularly updated lists of crisis intervention team members at their fingertips, helping to assure the right parties are responding to emergency calls. These partnerships between LenapeValleyFoundation, local law enforcement, and emergency first responders highlight Lenape's ongoing effort to bring the best care possible to Bucks County residents.
Or to utilize the police to abduct and exploit the public. Moving on. Now, who runs Bucks County Crisis? Okay. This gentleman right here runs Bucks County Crisis. Now, I have a witness. This gentleman called me without any reason to call me. I've never contacted this person prior to him contacting me. I've never asked this person a question prior to him contacting me. This person had nothing to do with the situation that I'm trying to handle, but yet he went out of his way to contact me. Now, this is what's interesting. In his crisis intervention unit, and in retrospect, it seems like it was actually a case of attempted murder that failed because my ex-girlfriend had them administer my medication. But so at his crisis intervention unit, I was denied heart medication for over 12 hours, probably around 15 hours, if not more, probably was more actually. So I was denied my heart medication and then was overdosed on psychiatric medicine against the direction of my cardiologist, which my cardiologist did not want me on psychiatric medication because it had caused the autonomic dysfunction, or at least it's assumed that it has caused the autonomic dysfunction that I suffer from. This gentleman is the one that's in charge of that crisis unit. Okay? This gentleman here. This gentleman. Okay? Who also, and I have a witness, the same witness that had to go to my cardiologist and had to have my cardiologist contact his crisis unit to administer my prescribed heart medicine to prevent me from having a cardiac episode. The same witness heard this gentleman on the phone with me try to accuse me of stating that I threatened an act of lethal violence against him when I did not. Okay, luckily I have a witness. If I did not have a witness, it would be his word against mine. His word as the guy that trains the police on how to respond to psychologically disturbed people. Does he tell the police how to make up fake evidence? I don't know. Does he tell the police to trick psychologically disturbed people into becoming hospitalized so that he can make money off of them? I don't know. Does he tell them to bring them to crisis so he can deny them their prescribed medication and then overdose them on psychiatric medication? I don't know, but I know it's all plausible. This is more horrifying bullshit going on. Bucks County is testing a program that will pair social workers with police. Right. So a new Bucks County pilot program will pair social workers with police. So this program, in partnership with the Bucks County Human Services Department, which I caught in a lie trying to cover up twice now, trying to cover up LenapeValleyFoundation, apparently trying to kill me with an overdose of psychiatric medication and denial of my heart medication. Okay, they covered that one up, found no wrongdoing when I complained, and then found all sorts of things that didn't make any sense and just sided with Lenape despite the fact that I have three witnesses. I have three witnesses to this. One of them is a psychiatrist, okay, that agree with me, not them. So the social workers that will be there will be Rachel Augusto from LenapeValleyFoundation. I would assume she probably doesn't work there anymore. She probably quit and found a better job. And Walter Bynum, who recently worked in behavioral health in Philadelphia. Why doesn't he work in behavioral health anymore in Philadelphia? What's the story behind that, I wonder? Most populated, and Bucks County's most populated municipality, also our highest crime municipality, which is Ben Salem, these individuals are going to aid the police in responding to people with psychiatric illnesses. Yeah, because that's going to go over great. Okay, the officers who can act as and they will also be able to take advantage of Ben Salem police officers who can act as translators to Spanish, Russian, Polish, Arabic, and Hindi speakers. They can also use a phone translator line to help those who may not speak English. Yeah, this is really going to help police officers apprehend criminals. If anything, what this is going to do is this is going to slow down the ability to apprehend the potential offender and put everyone at risk, whereas before it would have just been the police officer at risk, which is his job. Now you're going to have the police officer at risk, these dipshits at risk, and the translator at risk. This is completely asinine. Now, NAMI, who works very closely with all of the mental health agencies and all of the counties, and they claim to be advocates for the mental health recipients, are actually advocates for the pharmaceutical drug companies to basically have everybody labeled with a mental illness. And here we go.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. I'm Joe Vanable. I'm the President of the Board of Directors of NAMI Indiana.
So keep this in mind. More mental illness screening will result in more drugging of children, more unnecessary drugging of children. I've already gone over that. When I went over Teen Screen. This is unnecessary drugging of children with debilitating side effects from these drugs.
Children in the juvenile justice system, in juvenile detention centers.
See how they're using the juvenile justice system and the justice system to make more lifelong recipients of drugging and therapy? They are utilizing the criminal justice system as a means to expand their base of profit, their profit base.
Are being dealt with in ways that are not appropriate for their well-being. NAMI calls on federal, state, and local leaders to immediately take affirmative steps to implement mental health screening for children and adolescents, with the following guidelines and protections in place. Mental health screening must be voluntary.
Now ask yourself this: how can a child volunteer for anything? They can't. They're not legally capable of volunteering for anything.
And available for all children. Parental consent, positive parental consent, active parental consent from legally authorized surrogates must be obtained for all
legally authorized surrogates. So what they are going to do is utilize the criminal justice system and the family court system to destroy the family unit, to remove children from the home, to drug the children, to make the children compliant with the status quo, and to destroy the lives of these children.
Mental health screening. Mental health screening must not be used in a discriminatory manner. All individuals administering mental health screening must be appropriately trained and qualified, both to administer the screening instruments and to interpret the results.
Now keep this in mind. Teen Screen, a suicide screening operation, uses clinically untrained interviewers who go through 2 days of training. Keep that in mind. They utilize clinically untrained interviewers to interpret psychology, to interpret psychiatric interviews, who go through 2 days of training. 2 days of training.
All information related to screening must be kept strictly confidential, and the privacy of youth and their families must be protected. All mental health screening instruments must be shown to be reliable and effective in identifying children.
There have been absolutely no, and you will find this, there is no reliable way to diagnose any mental illness. It just is not a reliable field of healthcare. It's not reliable.
In need of further assessment.
Now keep that in mind. There is no evidence that screening for suicide risk reduces suicide attempts. That's from the federal government. That's from the U.S. Preventative Services Suicide Task Force, from a meta-analysis that they did.
Validity studies must be done to ensure that screening instruments are culturally and linguistically appropriate and administered in a manner appropriate for culturally and racially diverse communities.
Now, this is them pushing multiculturalism as opposed to assimilation on the public. This, you see, they get all aspects of the radical lefty kookery going on in this.
Schools must never use mental health screening results or the refusal to consent to screening as a basis for any adverse action against a child or family. All children identified through screening as potentially requiring mental health services must be referred for an immediate comprehensive mental health evaluation by a qualified and trained professional.
Now, if the person doing this interview is qualified and trained, why would you have to send them to somebody else who's more qualified and more trained?
Children ultimately identified as requiring mental health services must be immediately linked and offered, not required, offered appropriate treatment and services.
Notice he said they require the mental health treatment, but not required, but offered. He uses the word required a lot in a sort of contradictory way, doesn't he?
And provided with comprehensive information about treatment options. About the mental health treatment system. This is a very, very important issue. And I hope you will act positively on it. Thank you.
So this is psychiatrist Dr. Peter Breggin going to discuss how psychiatric medications, all psychiatric medications, are neurotoxins. I'm not a doctor. Dr. Peter Breggin is. Let's hear what Dr. Peter Breggin says. So keep that in mind. I'm not a doctor. I'm not giving medical advice. I'm not qualified to. However, Dr. Peter Breggin is a doctor. He's a psychiatrist. Let's hear what he has to say.
There's a simple way to understand psychiatric drugs. They are neurotoxins. They poison brain cells, and because they are so neurotoxic, they not only destroy brain cells, which are the most sensitive cells, so they destroy them first. They destroy liver cells often. They destroy thyroid cells often. They can destroy skin cells, produce terrible rashes. So we're talking about very destructive drugs. Now, if you read the label, so we're talking about very destructive drugs. So we're talking about very destructive drugs. Now, if you read the label, that is the full prescribing information, which is a document created in partnership between our Food and Drug Administration and the drug companies. You read one of these labels, you find out what a toxin is like. What a toxin is like. What a toxin is like. Especially a neurotoxin. Especially a neurotoxin. Especially a neurotoxin. Because there are pages and pages of the manifestations of neurotoxicity. Because there are pages and pages of the manifestations of neurotoxicity. Because there are pages and pages of the manifestations of neurotoxicity. And in fact, since the brain has limited toxic reactions, has infinite creative reactions. It writes Shakespeare, the brain's infinite creative reactions. But when you damage it, it gets very stereotyped. Everything is simpler and simpler. So all the psychiatric drugs and neurotoxins, they end up with a simpler. So all the psychiatric drugs and neurotoxins simpler. So all the psychiatric drugs and neurotoxins simpler. So all the psychiatric drugs and neurotoxins, they end up with a common final pathway of what happens when you simplify the functioning of the brain. So if you take any neurotoxin, arsenic, it doesn't. Any neurotoxin, arsenic, it doesn't. Any neurotoxin, arsenic, it doesn't. Any neurotoxin, arsenic, it doesn't matter. Alcohol in big enough doses for a long enough time, which psychiatric drugs always do. That was for a long enough time, which psychiatric drugs always do. That was for a long enough time, which psychiatric drugs always do. That was for a long enough time, which psychiatric drugs always do. They always give big enough doses or they wouldn't have their effects. What you get is apathy. 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 As the energy, what I call deactivation, as the energy of the person is reduced. Activation as the energy of the person is reduced. Activation as the energy of the person is reduced. You get occasional euphoria, artificial high, artificial high, artificial high, artificial high, which usually diminishes in favor of the apathy. And because they afflict the frontal lobes, because they all massively cross the blood-brain barrier. And because they afflict the frontal lobes, because they all massively cross the blood-brain barrier, they're hitting everywhere in the brain. That's why they're hitting everywhere in the brain. They're hitting everywhere in the brain. That's why they're different from a knife wound even into the head. They're more damaging than that. That's why they're different from a knife wound even into the head. They're more damaging than that. That's why they're different from a knife wound even into the head. They're more damaging than that. That's why they're different from a knife wound even into the head. They're more damaging than that. Because they're infiltrating the whole circulatory system. Infiltrating the whole circulatory system of the brain. It's encapsulated, but every drug is tailored to get in there. So it's going through the brain, it's infiltrating the brain, and it's got to eventually hit all of the emotion and intellectual centers of the brain. Got to eventually hit all of the emotion and intellectual centers of the brain. Got to eventually hit all of the emotion and intellectual centers of the brain. And when you do that, the brain just becomes indifferent. The brain just becomes indifferent. The brain just becomes indifferent. It's close to apathy, but it's a little different. You just don't care anymore. But it's a little different. You just don't care anymore. But it's a little different. You just don't care anymore. You're just not engaged in life anymore. You're just not engaged in life anymore. You're just not engaged in life anymore. Nothing quite matters to you as much anymore. And then, I think it's because of the frontal lobe injury, you develop what I call medication spellbinding. You develop the inability to understand the effects of the neurotoxin. So the technical term that I use in the literature when I develop this concept is intoxication anosognosia. Anosognosia is a concept that developed in neurology, that when portions of the brain are injured, you may not recognize the injury. Even you get a stroke on one side and the hand doesn't move anymore. You may not even recognize it because something happens that you begin to lose the perception of yourself. Well, Well, when the entire brain is infiltrated, with a disease process like encephalitis or a psychiatric drug, and they're very similar. In encephalitis, I've written books and articles in the scientific literature about this. The psychiatric drugs mimic encephalitis. So when you do that, you get this really drastic indifference that eventually becomes intoxication and anosognosia. You don't know what's happening to you. So you get patients who are walking around like zombies on your psychiatric ward. And the patient doesn't understand the depth of this crushing effect. The family does. So the family comes into the hospital and they have a little meeting with the patient who's sitting there like this. And enough of any drug will do this. You start with the most toxic drugs of all, the so-called antipsychotic drugs. They're simply the most toxic of all. They're simply the most toxic of all. And they're simply the most toxic of all. The so-called antipsychotic drugs, they're simply the most toxic of all. The so-called antipsychotic drugs, they're simply the most toxic of all. The so-called antipsychotic drugs, they're simply the most toxic of all. And you get this effect with one dose. You can knock down a dog. You can knock down an ape. You can knock down a frantic person in the emergency room. One dose. That's how toxic they are. One dose. You don't care anymore. No, I'm not going to, no menace to anybody. The patient has no idea what's hit them. They can go on for months like that. They can go on for years like that. Over the years, the quality of life begins to deteriorate. Over the years, the quality of life begins to deteriorate, and they don't know it. But their loved ones often know it. Their children know it. And they'll sit in a conference room, and let's say you have a mother, a father, a 10-year-old son, and there's the man, 40 years old, maybe he's divorced, and he's sitting there with his son and his parents maybe, and the social worker, the psychiatrist, the psychologist. So you have a family seminar with 3 or 4 family members, the psychiatrist, the psychologist, the social worker. And everybody in the room knows that the patient who's slumped over like this is practically being killed by the psychiatric drugs. is practically being killed by the psychiatric drugs. Everybody knows this, except the psychiatrist, the psychologist, the social worker. Knows this, except the psychiatrist, the psychologist, the social worker. And
So keep that in mind. These are the people that you want teaching the police to respond to the mentally ill. People that they have too pronounced of a cognitive dissonance to understand what's going on with the people that they're charged. They're charged with helping these people, and they have so much of a cognitive dissonance that they can't understand that their help for these people is hurting them.
this, except the psychiatrist, the psychologist, the social worker, and the patient. The people who know are the family members. It's an astonishing thing, and we could talk a lot about this, that you can bring up doctors not to know that they are destroying the lives of their patients. Why else would I be the first psychiatrist to ever say to the world, lobotomy is immoral? Psychiatrist to ever say to the world, lobotomy is immoral. Psychiatrist to ever say to the world, lobotomy is immoral as well as unscientific. No evidence it does anything except destroy people. No evidence it does anything except destroy people. No evidence it does anything except destroy people. You get in there, you bore a hole. We used to put formaldehyde in people's brains through those holes. We used to put formaldehyde in people's brains through those holes. We used to put formaldehyde in people's brains through those holes. By the time I came around and did an international campaign to stop lobotomy and psychosurgery, which I mostly did throughout Europe, Canada, North America, U.S., I came and I debated people in England and so on, and even stopped programs in India and Japan. Before I came along, no psychiatrist in the history of my profession had ever stood up publicly and said, this must be stopped. It slowed down because the drugs cause lobotomies. Remember, drugs cause lobotomies. It slowed down because the drugs cause lobotomies. It slowed down because the drugs cause lobotomies. It slowed down because the drugs cause lobotomies. Remember, there's only just a few ways to damage the brain, and there's only just a few ways to damage the brain, and there's only just a few ways to damage the brain, and a few ways to respond. So you damage the brain if by doing massive cuts in the front, or electrical storms in the front, or poisoning it, and you're going to get these common effects of apathy, indifference, spellbinding, where you don't know what's happening to yourself. Why was I the only one? Why am I still the only psychiatrist to stand up in public and testify in court and say, shocking the brain with 10 times now the energy levels we used decades ago? Testify in court and say, shocking the brain with 10 times now the energy levels we used decades ago. Testify in court and say, shocking the brain with 10 times now the energy levels we used decades ago. Shocking the brain until you cause flatlining. Shocking the brain until you cause flatlining. Shocking the brain until you cause flatlining. Shocking the brain until you flatline. Until you flatline. Until you flatline. After, of course, a massive seizure. After, of course, a massive seizure. After, of course, a massive seizure exhausts your brain and you flatline, so that you come out in a condition which any reasonable physician would say is severe traumatic brain injury. Which any reasonable physician would say is severe traumatic brain injury. Which any reasonable physician would say is severe traumatic brain injury, because it has every characteristic that meets the scientific criteria for injury. Because it has every characteristic that meets the scientific criteria for severe traumatic brain injury. You have injury. Because it has every characteristic that meets the scientific criteria for severe traumatic brain injury. You have a massive insult to the brain. You have a massive...
These people don't operate in the world of science and evidence. They operate in the world of imagination. They think that their imagination and their cognitive dissonance, what they believe is true, regardless of what the evidence says, as Dr. Bregging is pointing out here.
Seizure, you're flatlining, followed by complete loss of memory for everything surrounding the trauma. Never mind the past that's going to memory loss and the future memory loss. You have confusion, you have disorientation, takes you many minutes to awaken. You awaken in a state where your judgment is gone, where you have to be taken care of by other people. Judgment is gone, we have to be taken care of by other people. Judgment is gone, we have to be taken care of by other people.
So keep in mind, this is supposed to be a means of rehabilitating people. But yet it's debilitating people. Not rehabilitating, debilitating.
I mean, not one, not two, not three, but 2 or 3 a week, week after week. And somebody wants to claim you need a scientific study, which we have, to show it causes brain damage. They claim you need a scientific study, which we have, to show it causes brain damage. They claim you need a scientific study, which we have, to show it causes brain damage. What upbringing does it take of a psychiatrist? What does it take so that you don't look at this and say, oh my God, the horror?
1 in 7.
You don't look at this and say, oh my God, the horror. So all of this raises issues about what is it to be a human being, and I hope that gets touched on. What is it to be a human being? We are so malleable. I remember there's a man I haven't seen in decades who did a study of Norwegian concentration camps. He said, the Norwegians always said during the war how they're terrible Germans. And then when the Germans took control of Norway, they set up a concentration extermination camp right in Norway. And they got plenty of people to participate. And you can bet you anything you could do in the U.S. I'm certain of it. Not even big changes.
And this is what I warned the county for when I used to go to county meetings, is we are a hop, skip, and a jump away from becoming like Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, where it's already being used for this, but where it's being used to the point where instead of psychiatric wards and things like that, you start seeing euthanasia centers and things like that. We are real close to that in this country, and people keep ignoring it and ignoring it and ignoring it, and agencies like Lenape Valley keep expanding these things and expanding these things and expanding these things. It is a hop, skip, and a jump away from euthanasia across the nation because of agencies like Lenape Valley pushing the expansion of the encroachment of their agencies so that they can make money. Okay? Mark my words. I've said this years ago and I was right. The more you see psychiatry and mental health creep into the daily lives, it creeps into law enforcement, it creeps into government. Sooner or later, you will see this country become like Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, where people are being murdered wholesale because they're considered undesirable for having ideas that go against the grain. Maybe they don't believe in global warming. Maybe they believe in God. Maybe they don't believe in God. Who knows? But with agencies like Lenape Valley pushing what they're pushing, it is a hop, skip, and a jump to nationwide euthanasia and sterilization across this country. Mark my words.
Anything you can do in the U.S., I'm certain of it. Not even big changes. We put the Japanese into these terrible camps. Why do we pick them? We hardly put any Germans in. So if you can tell somebody somebody's different, you can do anything in the world you want to. That's human nature. Somebody's different, you can do anything in the world you want to. That's human nature. Somebody's different, you can do anything in the world you want to. That's human nature. But somehow in medicine, in particular, that has gotten activated over. But somehow in medicine, in particular, that has gotten activated over. But somehow in medicine, in particular, that has gotten activated over centuries of arrogance, over centuries of arrogance and faded over centuries of arrogance and medical control and medical know-it-allness. Then you get somebody like Peter Garza who comes along, or myself who comes along, and, we just don't know about all that. We're reading stuff about human beings. We want to know what helps them, what hurts them. We're not thinking what's going to empower me. I think that's one of the big differences. We're thinking about how do you...
Exactly. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, and who has absolute power more than the person that controls the life or death of their patient? And that is what you are going to see with agencies like Lenape Valley expanding, encroaching in the everyday activities into the school systems, okay, into law enforcement, into the judicial system, okay, into the government, into the very governance of this country. You see these agencies encroaching more and more and more, controlling more and more and more your everyday life, deciding who is allowed to behave, who is allowed to walk the streets, who is allowed not to walk the streets. They're not qualified. They're not any more qualified than you or me if you really get down to it.
Save lives. How do you protect people? I remember thinking that as an 18-year-old.
What you need to remember is, being that psychiatry is so horrifically unproven, and psychology is horrifically unproven, and the DSM is horrifically unproven. These things are not proven. These are ideas. These are theories. These people are not qualified to be doing these things. I would feel far more comfortable if the corrections agencies, the corrections departments and things of that nature that have actually been dealing with dangerous people and things like that were more in control about determining who was dangerous and who wasn't. These psychiatrists, these psychologists, these social workers, they are crazed with controlling how people behave, how they act, how they view the world. They are crazed with pushing their ideologies, whether that ideology is feminism, whether that ideology is communism, whether that ideology is whatever. What I've seen most pronounced is anti-Americanism and racism against white people. But when you see the transgenderism, and I'm not against transgenderism, but when you see it being pushed on people as you do by the mental health community, it's horrifying. It's horrifying that this is the world we live in. We live in a world where people are encouraging mad science that dwarfs that which was practiced in the Third Reich. It dwarfs that which was practiced in the Third Reich. Do you think there was any transgender surgeries being done under the Third Reich? Do you think any children were being given hormone blockers by the Third Reich? I don't think so. I might be wrong. I doubt it. I might be wrong, but I doubt it. This is horrific. And even if the Third Reich was doing it, they were not doing it in the idea that this was making people better. They were doing it as an experimentation. So you have the mental health industry experimenting on the public. Okay? Who do you have saying no more? You have nobody. Except people like Dr. Bregan and the late Dr. Saz, the Church of Scientology, the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, Tom Cruise. These are the only people you have standing up for you, for me, and for the public.
They're in a state mental hospital. How do you protect these people? But most people are thinking, how do I protect myself? And I don't blame them. I don't blame them. I don't make my friends become reformers or something. But this is the complicated nature of human life.
And that's the issue. How do I protect myself? This is the problem that I ran into with my therapist. She needs to protect herself. She knows how ferocious, how unrelenting, how life-destroying the field of mental health is, not only to the clients, not only to the patients, but to the people that practice it if they dare go against the grain. I know that because she confided in me that she knows the wrongness of the actions of her supervisor. She knows the wrongness of the actions of her agency. But what she did not do is she did not take responsibility for it. Or I should say she took limited responsibility. And she encouraged me. She explained to me, this is not a winnable battle. She reiterated again and again, this is not a winnable battle. I refuse I refuse to accept that it's not a winnable battle. I refuse to keep my mouth shut while agencies like Lenape Valley poison the public, exploit the public, imprison the public wrongfully, damage their brains, damage their bodies, and cause a mass crisis to the public.
How do I protect myself? And I don't blame them. I don't blame them. I don't make my friends become reformers or something. But this is the complicated nature of human life. I'm getting far afield. Let me talk very briefly about some of the things done to me, because that might be interesting to just get them in.
This is the stuff that they do to people. Now, he's a psychiatrist. When I worked in mental health, there was a psychiatrist. They demanded that this person give psychiatric medication to everyone that came into their office. When he or she refused, they threatened to destroy their life. The agency threatened to destroy their life. This is the mentality of the people that control these agencies. It's gotten out of the hands of the psychiatrists. It's now in the hands of the politicians. It's now in the hands of the liberal elites. It's now in the hands of the crazy feminists that control these agencies. It's now in the hands of the people that want to get their pound of flesh from the people that they consider to be the oppressors. Okay? That's what's going on.
The efforts made to destroy a person who starts out young like me and who has a massive accomplishment like, preventing the lobotomists from coming back and doing again millions of people around the world. It wasn't just the license attack in 87. When they failed at that, in 1994, I was made the scientific researcher for all the combined suits against Eli Lilly for alleged violence, suicide, mayhem, mania, violence, suicide, mayhem, mania, violence, suicide, mayhem, mania caused by the first of the long line now of newer antidepressants, many of them called SSRIs, but just think of the newer antidepressants because there's many and there's mixed. Once I got that position, I discovered that even though I was now extremely well known on all the television shows, Oprah, every big television show I was on, morning news, evening news, Dan Rather this didn't matter. I couldn't get a book published. A long struggle began where a few brave publishers, always with the president believing in me of the corporation, would publish me. And I found that Eli Lilly...
Now, when you take into consideration that my therapist has the goal of becoming a PhD and basically becoming a professor of social work, that's not a chance that she's going to take speaking out against these maniacal maniacs that are torturing the public, exploiting the public, and poisoning the public. She's not going to take that risk. Why? Because the universities are controlled by the same kooks, the same inbred group of kooks that control the mental health agencies.
Sending letters to all of the media, linking me to bizarre organizations with which I had nothing to do.
Now, keep in mind, this is exactly how they try to destroy certain politicians they don't like. They'll try, like with Tulsi Gabbard, they try to connect her to the World Economic Forum. They try to connect her to this. They try to connect her to that. Okay? They do things like this. Or everybody's a Freemason. That's another one. Everybody's a Freemason. Everybody's a Satanist. Everybody's this. Everybody's that. The only people that I'm aware of that are sacrificing children are these maniacs, these mental health practicing maniacs that are sacrificing children by poisoning them with these drugs, by distorting their views on life with their so-called therapies, by making them feel awful about themselves and all this other stuff, okay? By distorting their views about their own body, by causing gender dysphoria, by encouraging them to explore things that they would not have explored otherwise. That's who I see sacrificing children. It's not the Freemasons. It's not the Satanists. It's not any of these people. It's the mental health organizations that are doing this.
Me to bizarre organizations with which I had nothing to do.
I want to reiterate, when I say that, I do not mean that they are actually, they're not, quote, sacrificing children in the name of this or that. What I mean is they are sacrificing them in the sense that they are sacrificing them for a profit. They are sacrificing them for the greater good of how they want to distort reality, to distort society, to meet their perverted ideas of feminism, of transgenderism, of the LGBTQIAP movement, of the anti-white hysteria that they're pushing, of these things. That's what I meant. I do not mean that they are sacrificing them in what people may think of sacrifice, but there really is, in the long run, no different. You're destroying lives. You're destroying lives on the false altar of the false idol of the status quo.
And then during this period of time, and I have no idea who to attribute it to. I certainly can't attribute it to Eli Lilly. For one thing, Lilly was just the beginning of multiple other...
Now notice he's being honest. It's not Eli Lilly. It is basically an open conspiracy of like-minded individuals. An open conspiracy of like-minded individuals, the same people with the same mindset that run these universities, the same people with the same mindset that run these mental health clinics, the same people with the same mindsets that are going to turn our republic into a perverted form of National Socialist Germany or the Soviet Union, where people are being persecuted and most likely euthanized for their political views or their views about society or their disagreements with the status quo. Mark my words, you will see that. It's an open conspiracy of like-minded individuals all watching each other's asses.
Pharmaceutical companies who viewed me especially as being the central and single...
And politicians, as I showed. The county politicians, the state politicians. It goes very far. It goes very deep. It goes very wide. And it's all based around social conditioning, social control, and profit.
Scientific expert for all the suits against Lee. They viewed me as the person with his finger in the dike. The one person standing up to the antidepressants. You can see how successful I was, huh?
See, last time I asked to put my finger in a dike, I got a dirty look.
I was not successful at all, but I began at least the criticism of it. And during that period of time, my whole family got sick. And I've never talked about this on television before. And during that period of time, my whole family got sick. And during that period of time, my whole family got sick. And I've never talked about this on television before. My whole family, we got sick. My wife, and my youngest daughter, and me. We got respiratory illness.
Very interesting, huh? His whole family mysteriously got sick.
My whole family, we got sick. My wife, and my youngest daughter, and me. We got respiratory illness mainly. We couldn't figure out what it was. We went from doctor to doctor to doctor. And finally, a plumber went in our basement. And he came back, looking white. And do you know, he said, that the chimneys from both your water heater and your home oil burner have been removed? Water heater and your home oil burner have been removed?
Somebody tried to bump him off. Okay? This is the length that these people can go to.
Said that the chimneys from both your water heater and your home oil burner have been removed and hidden or placed behind the heaters and the furnace? No, we didn't. And of course, he immediately, it wasn't hard, just put them back in place and said they're going to have to be re-cemented. They're not cemented into place anymore. We were so bamboozled at the time, I don't think we never reported this. We never spoke about it. It was like, oh my God, this is the world we're in. What do we do? Later on, when the death threats became very specific, we're going to kill you, I'm going to kill your family at Christmas. We're going to kill you, I'm going to kill your family at Christmas. We're going to kill you, I'm going to kill your family at Christmas.
Again, this is the length that these maniacs will go to silence their opposition.
This is coming Christmas. This is October, November. We called the FBI. It was less cowed in the later on. We get the FBI in. I tell them, I think I know who this is. I think this is a very important celebrity who's being used by the drug companies, because I've been up against him. The FBI, and I gave him the name. The FBI said, sorry, we're not going to do it. We're not going there. I said, oh, let me talk to him some more. And they left. Then we called back. The FBI, they had no record of the meeting. They had no idea what we were talking about. Oh my God, this is what we're up against. And
this is why my therapist told me this is an unwinnable battle. Now, she didn't acknowledge that, but this is what she meant. This is what she meant, because she knows. She has inside knowledge of what's going on.
I went and I did freedom of information with the FBI. What's in my file? The only thing in my file was that I had signed a letter protesting the Vietnam War while I was in a uniformed service, which was illegal. I knew it when I signed the letter in the Washington Post. Here I was in uniformed service, but I wanted to protest what was going on in that war, and so I signed a letter, and that's what they had in there. They didn't have anything else. At least nothing they sent to me. So there were times when I consulted about wearing a flak vest and carrying a gun. See, America, you can sometimes carry a gun. But I decided, and in the discussions, there's really no way to defend yourself against a single assassin. There is no way. So I don't understand why I'm alive. I don't understand why I've come to this point in time after all these years. But I would say that it's a very good life. I mean, it is a very good life. I will not at 82 look back and say, wish I'd done more. I look back and I think, what in the world? How did that all happen? How did I do that?